Hi, this is Picking a Good Topic, part of the Biodefense Capstone course. Our agenda today, the keys to picking a good topic, the topic picking process, the paper topic typology, some good topics and some not so good topics, and we'll talk about all those things. All right, so 3 keys to picking a good topic. Step 1, pick a topic you love. Step 2, pick an important and interesting topic. And step 3, and probably most important, pick a doable topic. Let's talk about those each in turn here. First, you have to pick a topic you love. This should go without saying, but sadly I've seen a lot of students write about things they hated, or came to hate, or did because someone else thought they were a good idea. And that's really not a good thing. Because midway through the term, when it starts getting tough to stay inside and keep your butt at the desk, all weekend, it's going to really help if you are passionate about the topic, at least in some form. So in order to make sure that you pick a topic you love, start with what you're drawn to. Start with the things that are the most interesting to you. It's a personal thing. It's not about what other people think is more interesting or important or whatever. It's what you like. It could be a personal reason, you've been involved in that issue, you work on these issues, or maybe you don't work on those issues, but you'd like to, and something you always wanted to do, whatever it is. That's kind of how my whole career has been. Whatever's the next most interesting thing, I wind up having to write about it eventually because I just can't get it off my brain. Okay, so how do you, figure out, in the real world what that might look like? And there it's pretty simple, actually. You just, go back through all the stuff you've read for classes, articles, and books, and just sort of cherry pick and make a little pile of the things that you liked best. And I'll bet you that you start seeing a pattern, right? Certain topics will pop up over and over again, as well as certain kinds of methods. I think all of us inherently have preferences for certain kinds of methods, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, historical or policy analysis. There's just a way of doing business that each of us likes, feels most comfortable with. And so that marriage between the topic and the methods, this is something that you need to sort of sort through what you've been through and see what comes out on top. And as I say, it has to pass the keep you at the desk all weekend test. Is this the kind of thing that you're interested enough that at least for this term, you can forego the other pleasures of life to finish your capstone project? So that's the first key. The second key is to make sure that your topic that you are personally passionate about is an interesting and important one, or that you pick an interesting and important angle of attack on your topic of passion. And what I mean by that is, first, interesting. By interesting, I mean unexpected, unusual, or surprising. A lot of topics are none of the above. They're just sort of restatements of something that probably needed to be said, or measured, or assessed, but nobody was surprised to find the answer was, up is up and down is down. Interesting comes when, of course, you say something contrary to the conventional wisdom, when you point out that up is down and black is white and cats are living with dogs, things like that. Realistically, can we always write papers that are truly interesting? No, we can't. But we can try. We can edge toward looking at the world differently, making an insight that people hadn't thought of before because you used an unexpected way of thinking about it to illuminate something about the world. That's what we all enjoy. Maybe you remember in the papers, this is a few years ago now, but you think about people's weight as a personal thing. Well, then it turned out that when they studied people's social networks, that weight gain and weight loss are social things, that you can predict a person's individual weight gain or loss by what's happening to the weight gains and losses of the people in their close social networks. And that tripped me out because we think of weight as something that's a personal thing, not a social thing. But that's a surprising, interesting sort of thing, right? So that's what we're shooting for as an ideal, as a gold standard. Again, we can't always hit the gold standard, but we're trying. But even if we can't hit the gold standard of super, super cool and interesting, we can at very least make sure the topic is important. This is not a problem most biodefense students have, but just to be complete, an important topic is one that a lot of people care about. And there could be lots of reasons for that. It could be because it's an interesting topic. It could be because a lot of people are affected by the issue, whether it's Ebola or the flu or nuclear war or defense budgets. It's a big problem. It's a big topic. It has huge implications. And one of the quickest ways to find out whether something's important is to look through your journals and your books and to figure out whether people have written about it before. because in your situations, it's really a good thing if a lot of people have written about your topic before. Now, that may sound strange to some of you, and this is especially a worry for PhD students who are petrified that someone might have written about their topic, and they're like, oh no, I can't write about my topic anymore, someone else just wrote about that. But guess what? If no one in the history of mankind has ever written a word about your topic, you should immediately run away from that topic. It is a terrible topic, almost guaranteed. Why? Because nobody cares about it. It is unimportant. If you, a graduate student, are the first person ever to think about writing about a certain topic, you're a very smart person, but I think it's probably the case that that topic just isn't ready for prime time. Now, run it by me. We'll make sure of that. But what you really want to do is you want to write a paper in the meat and potatoes heart of the field, where a lot of people are writing about it, and thus a lot of people will read what you have to say. If you can add something new to that discussion, a lot of people will care what you have to say. You'll get famous and get jobs. So interesting and important. The third key, and really a huge one for you, is you need to pick a doable topic. And that really has three sort of dimensions to it. The first is simple, scope. Do you have time to finish the project? This is one of the biggest concerns that I will raise with 90% of your proposals. Most of you will start off with something that's too broad, and you won't have time to finish the project that you've scoped out. So the first thing we'll have to do is check your scope. All right, once you've got a scoped project that is doable in one semester, then we have to ask about the methods. Can you implement the methods required? Now, any general topic is something you can study using any number of different methods. But once you have scoped down to a research question, right? I want to know, the answer to question X. That question itself is going to imply a particular method. You might be asking about public opinions, so you're going to be looking at surveys, analysis. You might be looking at some kind of statistical analysis. You might be looking at historical case studies, right? And the question is, do you have that skill set? We don't have all of them. We have preferences usually for one kind of methods or another. This is not the time to learn a new one, right? You only have one term. You don't want to be crazy by the end of the term, probably. I'm just guessing. Most of us have jobs and other things to do. So even if the question is great, the topic is interesting and important, and it's scoped so that it would be a doable project within one term, if you just aren't a master of that method yet, you probably want to pass on that one until, I'm not trying to deter you from learning new methods, but this is probably not the time to do it, right? And then the final piece of doability is the data. Is the necessary data available, or can you get it relatively quickly, or generate it relatively quickly? Because there are a lot of doable research questions out there that would make great capstone papers that you could do if only there were data, but there isn't. And this actually turns out to be a fairly common problem. There are just a lot of things that we care about that we don't have any data for, and that we have no prospect of getting the data for. And so always keeping in your mind as you're thinking about questions, can I answer that question with the data available to me? Because you may think, oh, I'm not really a data person. I don't do quantitative stuff. I don't mean quantitative data. I mean information, right? Anything you write has to have information in it. And you need information on whatever topic it is that, to build arguments, to build discussion. So if there's no data, there's no paper. So doable topic. Okay. Let's talk for a second about the topic picking process, or the research question process, because what we're really trying to do is go from a general ballpark through a topic down to a research question that has an associated method of attack. So where all of us usually start with these things is we start in the general ballpark. And the first conversation I will typically have with a student in person about these issues is, I'll say, what do you want to write your capstone about? And they go, I don't know, I'm thinking about suicide terrorism. I'll be like, well, that's not a topic. That's a ballpark. That's good that you are interested in a thing, but now we need to find a question in there somewhere that you're going to answer. And so people go, okay, yeah, but I don't really know what one to answer. And, how do I find it? It's in here somewhere. It's a big ballpark, though. And there's actually a fairly straightforward way to start that process. And what you need to do is you need to go to the journals, and you need to read the last couple of years of, scour the last couple of years of the literature in those journals for articles on your topic, and give them a high-level sort of read. And what you're looking for are the 3 Ds. You're looking for debates, disagreements, and deficiencies. And the reason is pretty straightforward, because where you find a debate, say with suicide terrorism, Bob Pape over here, dying to win, he argues that suicide terrorism is really effective against democracies. And then you have his counterpoint, Max Abrams, who argues, no, terrorism doesn't work, various reasons. And so there's this interesting debate. And you watch now other people write about terrorism and suicide terrorism in particular, and they reference Max Abrams versus Bob Pape, and then they add their 2 cents. And so it won't take you very much reading over the last couple of years to start seeing the same names pop up over and over again, to see certain debates and themes pop up, topics within the ballpark, right? And that's when you're going to start to realize if there's a debate, that means there are still open questions. If we're still having a debate, it means the answer isn't so slam dunk that we've stopped arguing. And so that's where you're going to be able to add to the conversation. How could I tell who's right? Right? So that's what you want to say. All right, there's a debate. There's 2 sides. What could I say that would help us decide which side is right? Right? And so that's the kind of thing. Unanswered questions, debates, disagreements. That's your opening. So then you've got your ballpark and you've decided, hey, there's this debate about the effectiveness of suicide terrorism. I mean, there's a million things you could write about suicide terrorism, but you've sort of honed in on this debate over effectiveness. So you've narrowed your ballpark to a topic within there, and now you need to narrow your topic down to a specific question. And so you might narrow that down to, let's make sure this is really scopable and you could finish it in one term. So let's say you're studying Africa and you want to study Al-Shabaab in Somalia, and you say, all right, is the suicide terrorism of Al-Shabaab effective? Okay, well, that's actually a pretty specific question. You have a specific group. They've been operative over just not too long a time span. They use suicide terrorism, and how effective has it been? That's a specific question. So you've gone from a general ballpark, I'm interested in suicide terrorism. You've scoured the literature for some debates and disagreements, and you found out there's a sort of disagreement about is it effective or not. And then you've found a specific way to do a doable research question that you might be able to actually answer in one term. See how that worked? We went big, found some gaps and places to contribute, and we got that theme, and we squeezed it down to a doable topic, right? And then you want to make sure that the methods you'll need to answer that are things you can do. So in this case, you might then collect information from the Global Terrorism Database about all the Al-Shabaab attacks and which ones were suicide, and then you'd need to maybe read the news to see what happened in the wake of each of those attacks, and you could read, U.S. intelligence stuff on Al-Shabaab, whatever was available, open source, and see what their, successes and setbacks have been, and you could kind of write a nice historical kind of case study of each of their major things and overall how they're doing. Right? That sounds like something that most of us could probably do without, any fancy methods training, right? So once you've written all this down sort of in a draft proposal to yourself, here's my question, here's why it matters, here's, how I might go about answering it, here's resources, here's what maybe some other people have said that would give me, a framework for organizing my paper. Then you're going to sleep on it. You're going to get some feedback from your writing partner, from me, and then you're going to wake up in the morning, see how it feels, polish it up, make some changes, and then eventually, voila, you're going to have an excellent topic and research question. As you're doing this, one of the things you're going to end up doing is picking a topic or a research question that falls into one of several major categories of paper type. And I'm going to talk about the 4 most common. There are sort of others that are a little bit more niche and that, frankly, I really don't want you doing probably unless you're, have a particular good reason to. But these are the 4 most common kinds of papers that I get from students anyway. And they're probably the ones that are most appealing to you, just again, based on, what kind of students the biodefense program usually has. So the first is policy analysis, and that is, there's a lot of different variation within that category, but basically the idea is you conduct some kind of original review of the strengths and weaknesses of an existing policy, whether it's the United States or some international organization, or it's a strategy of a terrorist group that you're assessing, or the strategy of a country towards something or other. So one example could be, is the United States strategy for medical countermeasures sound or not? Or is the BWC effective? Or is Al-Qaeda's strategy of franchising and having affiliates effective? Right? Those are all policy analysis sort of type of topics. And so that's, again, the reason for the typology is to help you think as you're trying to hone your ballpark down into a topic, into a research question. What kind of paper do you want to write? What kind of paper are you more comfortable writing? And so each of these kinds of papers, when you write your proposal, when I respond to it, I'm going to, in my mind, I'm going to figure out which one of these it's in, and my responses to you about what your paper is going to need to do and how it's going to be structured, what kind of journal articles would be your exemplars, will depend on what kind of topic you're doing. So policy analysis is one of the most common. The second most common is a historical explanatory. Basically, as the name suggests, you're trying to explain some important thing that has happened. So, why did the U.S. give up biological weapons? Why did Syria use chemical weapons in the Civil War? Why does France keep selling nuclear materials to rogue nations? Why did Al-Qaeda rise to supremacy among the Islamists? Why did important things happen? Now again, scope, keep scope in mind. It can't be too big a thing, but this is just to give you a sense, right? A third popular paper topic type is theory testing. Very popular in political science in general. So, for example, one of our students wrote a paper trying to figure out whether realism or organization theory was the better theory for explaining the evolution of U.S. biological weapons strategy since the end of the Cold War. Each theory makes some predictions about how strategy and doctrine will evolve, and so you lay out those predictions from each one, then you see what actually happened, and boom, you test those two theories, in this case, against each other. This is important because in political science and international security, theories are our main tools, and so we're always testing and sharpening them to see how they're doing. And then related and less common and more of a stretch, but can be really satisfying and really interesting, is a theory proposing paper. It may be that you've sort of looked already at other theories and decided they just come up short and that you need a new theory to explain what's going on. And so you want to write a paper that develops a novel theory to explain some important phenomenon. Why do nations develop nuclear weapons? That's an example on the example document that you're going to have in your folder on Blackboard. Too big for a semester, but the idea that, hey, maybe you've all read Scott Sagan's paper on proliferation, 3 models in search of the bomb, or many of you will have anyway. And in that one, that was a theory, sort of a theory testing or theory applying paper where he said, look, there's these 3 theories about why nations build nuclear weapons, and let's sort of show how each of them can be helpful explaining these various cases. Recently in international security, there's a new article that says, yeah, those old theories, not so good. They miss a lot of things. And here's a new theory that actually explains it all much better. So that's another kind. And I'll explain, or I'll mention in a minute, another paper by a student who wrote about zombies. America's in love with zombies right now. I don't know of a single theory that predicts that. So write me a theory that explains why Americans are so in love with zombies right now. But we weren't so in love with zombies 20, 30 years ago. That'd be a good theory to hear about. All right, so that's your basic paper typology. And as you're ballparking and you're narrowing and you're trying to figure out what's going to drive you, think about what kind of paper it's going to be writing. It's going to have a lot of implications for you. Some more examples of good topics. These are capstone papers that have been written for me in the past. One current one is Fairfax County ready to respond to Ebola? And for each of these, you can read the different kind of methods. Each of these comes with a different kind of methods that just to give you a good sense of you can do just about anything you want as long as it's scoped so you can get it done in a term and it answers the question satisfactorily. Everything is open. So is Fairfax County ready to respond to Ebola? Interviews with leadership and comparisons of budgets and policies to best practice. Really cool project. Are religious terrorists more violent than other terrorists? Student used the GTD to look at many years of event data and analyze casualty rates, basically, lethality across different group types. Found that, yes, religious terrorists are more violent than others. A framework for predicting biological weapon proliferation. This is sort of a slightly different take than any of the 4 categories just exactly, but it's very impossible to really see biological weapons proliferation happening. It's so small, it can happen, really hidden. So how would we figure out even how to guess at who might be likely to proliferate? So a student created a framework. She said, I can't measure directly because I can't see it, no data, that's a problem, right? But I can probably measure proxies for how much a country feels like they need some kind of biological weapon, and then how capable they are of building it. So I can measure those things. And then she created an index. You know, that if you scored low on it, it means you don't want them probably, and you can't do them. And if you scored high, it means you probably want them, and you're probably very capable of it. And so to validate this, because you need to validate whether it makes any sense, she went back historically and measured U.S., Japan, and Soviet Union right before each of the countries developed biological weapons, and then measured each of those countries again right after they gave them up voluntarily. And lo and behold, yes, they scored all much higher right before starting their programs than they scored when they gave their programs up. And she said, okay, we have some superficial at least validation of the framework. Makes sense, seems to give the right answers on our test cases. So let's go out and measure some current cases and see what we find. That's a really neat way of doing things. And so, again, it's sort of an example of, well, if there's no data, but I can think of a unique and cool way to measure something that might give me leverage on it, that's a neat thing to do. Another student wrote about the relationship between zombies and biodefense news coverage in the mainstream media and public attitudes. And her basic argument was that, look, the public's more afraid of bio issues than ever, but it's not because of the news coverage, because the news coverage actually hasn't been very systematic. It hasn't been growing. It hasn't really changed in its tone very much. But one thing that has changed dramatically over the last 20, 25 years has been the number of zombie movies. And so she did a neat job of combining a look at what the zombie movies were like and how many of them have been released over the last 20 years with New York Times and television news coverage of BW issues. And then she looked also at all the Gallup polls and other things for public opinion data and fears of BW stuff over the same time period. Look for themes and correlations. So that was a really interesting one. Just a note there, it sounds like a big project. And in fact, she had written a term paper for me earlier on the zombie movie part. And so she had that already and said, I have this feeling that zombie movies explains more than other things. And so could I add a study of the content analysis of the news and also the public opinion analysis to this and sort of smush it up into one or bigger paper. And so that was how she managed to scope that. And then finally, a student did a neat project a couple years ago for me on the best way to sell a mandatory quarantine to the American public if there's an outbreak. There's an outbreak and the military hauls out the military rule and tells people to stay indoors or whatever and enforces it with shoot-on-sight curfews and all that good stuff. Might be hard to sell to Americans. So I said, if we're going to have to sell it, let's sell it effectively. So he created a survey with different hypothetical ways of justifying it. And he changed who the source of the messages were. Was it the White House and the president? Was it DOD or was it CDC? And so he came up with sort of some basic answers about the best way to justify and keep the American public cool with the quarantine. So that was a pretty neat project. So those are all perfectly good projects and gives you a sense of the kind of types and scope and things like that. Let's just finish up with a couple of reminder warnings about common pitfalls that you may be already wading through, and just to keep your brain on so that you can work your way through these pitfalls before you produce a proposal. First problem, again, too broad. Why do nations seek biological weapons? You're not going to answer that in one term. How does deterrence work? That's like a whole career. Where did Al-Qaeda come from? You don't have time for that history, man. I mean, that's just, and if whatever you did have time to write in one semester would be just a rehash of what everyone else has already said. And really a big goal here is to say something new that you have come up with. And so those are topics that are just too broad for you to do any damage to. And I know this from personal experience. My master's paper was horribly broad, and my advisor accused me of trying to solve all disease with my paper, and I admitted, yes, I did. Sorry, but I learned. The second piece that's sort of related is the no specific research question problem, which is sometimes I get proposals that will say something like, this paper will look at suicide bombing from 1990 to 2010 for themes and ideas. Now, I don't hear a question in there, right? You've got a topic, but you don't have a question. So you need to move from topic to specific question. No data, we talked about this, right? You need to have data. If you don't have data, that means you cannot answer your question with proof, right? So a couple things that, and this is a thing where biodefense students tend to ask a lot of questions like this. So many of you are about to write a paper that asks me to approve a paper that says, how easy would it be for the Islamic State to build a biological weapons capability? And I'm going to answer to you that no one knows, and you can't write a paper on it. And the reason is because there is no reasonable sort of data that you have to bring to bear on that. You don't know anything about the internal workings of Islamic State, or who works for them or who doesn't. And so all you can say is general things about how hard it is for terrorists to do this, but you have no data on Islamic State. I mean, the U.S. government doesn't have any idea either, so it's not like they're writing the paper. Nobody's writing that paper just yet. Okay, I mean, that's what sort of makes it scary, but it just means you can't write that paper. You know, sort of similar. What is the impact of the BioWatch program on U.S. security? I mean, who the heck knows? I mean, you know, that's one of the reasons people don't like it. They can't measure it. There's sort of an old line: if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Which, you know, maybe that says something right there. But unless you have a framework, right, that allows you to give a satisfactory answer to the question, right, that a framework that implies gathering certain data, bringing it to bear on the puzzle, you know, you can't ask the question. And then the last one, which, you know, I won't worry too much about, but, you know, every once in a while, you know, a student will sort of, out of frustration and exhaustion looking for a topic, just throw something on a piece of paper that really just doesn't rise to the level of interesting or important enough to spend a whole semester on. You know, I mean, how many terrorists can fit on the head of a pin, you know, if it's just rehashing something that was just written, that's a nobody cares. If it's too niche a topic, you know, or too silly, like underwater basket weaving and its relationship to biological weapons proliferation and stuff like that. You know, it's hard for me to imagine. I don't get too many of these, but just, you know, just so you know, keep it in the ballpark where everyone cares about the topic. Now, I'm pretty flexible. I'm interested in a lot of things, so don't worry too much about this, but try to stay interesting and important. Okay, that's picking a good topic. Look forward to talking with you guys about your topics and looking forward to seeing some very interesting research questions. Talk to you later.